You're watching Unrendered on IKTV. I'm Tony Regisford, and my guest is Professor Verene Shepherd. Professor, you are, like I said, a great historian, but history is a wide subject area. You know, what areas are you specializing in?
Okay. When you look at my CV, it looks crazy. And I seem to be going from Indian indentureship to, let's say, the history of African enslavement. Look at the indigenous people, white indentured servants. So it looks like I'm going off in all directions. But what unites my work is this. I look at the history of marginalized people, or traditionally marginalized people, because some of those people are no longer marginalized today, like women. Okay, I would say that you can't say now that women are marginalized in the sense of their presence and visibility.
There's still gender issues.
There are gender issues, and there's the issue of power, marginalization through power. But in terms of women's physical presence and what we know about them, I think that pretty much we can't be treated as a minority anymore. So the people I used to study, or that I still study, are people whose issues, either the issues have been marginalized, or the people themselves are a minority or have been a minority, and their issues marginalized. So that's what unites my work.
So specifically,
that's why it's social history.
Right. So as we're talking about marginalized people, let's say who they are.
Okay. So first of all, I studied women, enslaved women, because enslaved women's experiences were never brought to the fore, and certainly not in the way men's experiences were.
Different?
Yes, they were different. And people had myths about women's roles. They used to say that women only worked in the great house, and they were domestics primarily, and they were only important for breeding purposes. What we have seen is that they were very important for commodity production. They were the majority of every field gang. So my work has been trying to diffuse, some of, or just educate our people about what did women do historically, and therefore why they should not be treated as inferior.
I find it interesting as you speak about women and what their roles were as slaves, as people held in captivity who were enslaved. My memories of agriculture here in the days of arrowroot, for example. I bring that up. A lot of the people who dug the arrowroot were women. So was that maybe something that carried on from what happened on the enslavement period?
I think in the post-slavery period, in the modern period, you would see women as peasant farmers and trying to eke out a living and so on. But under slavery, they were the majority of field workers, and men had a wider range of occupation. I looked at some records recently for St. Kitts Nevis. Women had 2 occupations, the field and the house. Men were distributed across 10 occupations.
Which were what?
Coopers, carpenters, watchmen, couriers, and in Jamaica some of them were racehorse boys, as they used to call them. Many, butler, groom, valet, all of that stuff. So, men were the artisans, and most of them were in the most of the factory workers were men. So men were distributed across, and they were in the kind of supervisory and management position on the plantation. The drivers were all men. There were no women. You may have had a woman called a driveress, but she would be in charge of what was called a picnic gang. So I studied women because of the power relations and how women used to be treated as inferior and as a minority. So I've studied those. Then I studied Indian indentured laborers because, again, within Caribbean society they used to be marginalized. They came.
Where did the term coolie come about?
Because it's and Indian people don't like it, by the way.
No, I know.
It's derogatory.
Just like,
and it's
just like black people.
So we say the C word and we say the N word. We don't like neither the C word or the N word. And I think it's the same. It's the same thing like the N word. Yeah, it's a pejorative. You are like enslaved people. You are But really, in its etymological sense, it didn't have anything to do with enslaved people or anything. It was like a porter, a menial worker within Asian society. So you could have had Chinese too, being called the C word. But coming over here, because slavery was abolished and Indian people were placed in the work that enslaved people used to do, they became now the inferior people in the Caribbean. That's how other people were looking at them, okay? So they also had to struggle outside of their marginalization, you know, and now we have a better relationship, although you still have tensions in some parts of the Caribbean.
Right.
In Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, from Suriname, from what we know of modern politics in the Caribbean.
I think maybe due to, well, that history,
it's politics too.
Also their religion. Does that have to do with
difference?
Yes.
It's all about difference. We are not people who appreciate difference and treat differences in a kind of egalitarian fashion. We are people who hierarchize.
Yes.
So I'm more selected than you.
It's
human
nature
absolutely
yes.
everywhere. Right.
Yes.
So when Indian people were moved in here, and by the way, Chinese also came as indentured workers. There's a myth that Chinese came as merchants and so on, or Indians came as merchants and professionals. Not true. They started their lives in the Caribbean as indentured workers, contract laborers, bonded laborers. Then some of them bought themselves out of that and so on. Okay, so today, of course, we have a different situation.
Yes.
But so I studied indentured workers because certainly in Jamaica they were marginalized. Okay, then I studied working class white people. Because they were white indentured servants too.
Right.
And they were also white people who were not sugar plantation owners. So my PhD, for example, was called Pens and Pen Keepers in Jamaican society.
When you go across the Caribbean, and just hold your thought there, but when you go across the Caribbean, you see, for example, here in St. Vincent, there are people who are definitely, you know, from a white origin, a Caucasian origin.
Right.
But they're not. In fact, they're referred to, not recently, but people call them poor whites.
Poor whites. They used to,
right?
in the history books,
yeah,
they are referred to as poor whites.
So are these the same people you're talking about?
Yes.
The indentured?
Well, some of, not all of them who I studied were the poor whites. What I was trying to do with my PhD when I went to Cambridge was to look at a subject that was not very well studied. So I looked at those people in the Caribbean who were not sugar planters, but were doing very well. And I chose the livestock farmers. They were called pen keepers because, you know, animals were in a pen. And these pen keepers, they were not sugar farmers. They may have been supporting the sugar economy because, remember, we didn't have any electricity and power-driven, you know, equipment.
Right.
So we had animal-drawn mills. So they would have been producing to service the sugar economy, but they themselves were not in the sugar economy directly. So when I say I studied people who are marginalized, either through power relations or through the history, because we don't know much about them because nobody's writing about them. So those are the groups I have studied.
While you were mentioning the structure of, you're talking about women's roles, and you were looking at the men's roles, and you started outlining the structure of what really obtained on a plantation during the time of slavery. I'm going to throw this out to you. I interviewed once George Lamon, and I asked him about his impressions of the tourism industry. And he gave me a very direct answer. He said it's the plantation all over again.
And I will give you the same answer.
Because when you...
It's a new plantation.
When you outline that structure about butlers, valets, you know, horse boys,
the domestic workers, being women. You see them in the same, as guards, now the security guards are there, the gatekeepers, right? It's the same structure.
So what does Professor Shepherd think about the Caribbean, you know, pursuing tourism as one of the answers to making the economy stable and vibrant?
I think we have no choice but to make it a vibrant economy. But I think we have to insist as independent nations that our people who work in the tourist industry are not treated like enslaved people or that no neo-slavery comes back. Remember, you know, many of these, well, certainly for Jamaica, many of the hotels, those huge hotels, they are actually built on the former plantation lands, right? So that's one thing. And then their structure, many of these hotels, the management is not black. The management is from a different ethnicity, okay? And the workers are all from black people. And sometimes they bring in their own people for the middle management positions. So the structure is looking like the plantation.
It is the same to me.
Right? But the difference that we could make, so if it's what we can do to earn money, if they find our places attractive, they run away from the cold and so on. Okay, fine. So I'm not saying we must not have a tourist industry, but we must not have tourist training schools that teach subservience. And we must not allow people to come into our region and treat our people as if they're enslaved. And so that's the difference that we can make. Then we must learn the difference between service and subservience.
Yes. It seems to me to be quite a challenge. Governments are pressed to find answers, find jobs, get the economies going. So, of course, somebody comes with a multi-million-dollar project to, you know, they want a piece of your best land, but they say in return they're going to have X number of jobs.
Yeah.
And so, you know, your eyes light up and you think, I got to have this project going. Right. It actually becomes a platform issue, a campaign platform issue. I bought these jobs here, you know. But are they going deep enough to say to these people, yes, come, but come under these conditions? And
they should. And apparently some of us are not laying, some of our people are not some of our leaders are perhaps not laying down the terms, because they say I have to bring some of my workers. You should perhaps say 25% could be your workers, but 75% must be our people here. You see what I'm saying? So our leaders cannot afford to be accused by our people of being the kind of neo-colonial leaders. In other words, they must not copy the practices of the past. They must, as educated people now, say, no, we want the investment, but these are our terms because we're independent people.
We have to pick this back up in the third segment, but I want to, because there's another aspect of the whole tourism industry which relates to the use of locally produced goods. And, you know, that's something I want to
very topical issue right through the Caribbean right now.
We'll pick that up as soon as we come back from the break.
Great.
This is Unrendered on IKTV. My guest is Professor Verene Shepherd. I'm Tony Regisford. More of the program when we come back.